This video is brought to you by the Logitech Lightspeed Wireless range of keyboards, mice and headsets, the benchmark in wireless gaming performance.
In somewhat of a surprising move, Capcom has just released a brand new demo for Resident Evil Village, the next installment in the Resident Evil series. Last night we saw a wonderful showcase highlighting new features and more details about the game, and this demo is sort of a teaser. But to discuss it, I wanted to bring in not just one Alex, but two. First, we have Alex Battaglia.
Hey there, John. Thanks for inviting me. Talk about some tech.
There's some ray tracing in this game, as we'll get to, so you had to be here. And on the other side, coming straight from Japan, we are joined by Alex Aniel from Brave Wave and Limited Run Games. Alex?
Yo, how's it going?
Pretty good. So obviously, you're more of the Resident Evil expert, so I want to get your thoughts on this new demo and the reveal last night as well. So, yeah, you guys have all played the demo, I think. It's relatively short, but it does showcase some remarkable visuals, and we've learned more about the release as well. It's coming in May. It's actually a cross-gen game.
I guess the first thing to really talk about when going into this is the image quality on the PlayStation 5. I think we were walking through it looking around at a certain number of images, and it looks to be native 4K mostly from what we were looking at, John. Is that right?
So that's interesting. It's very, very sharp. Pixel counts do all seem to suggest 4K. The only question here is if it's using the reconstruction. And if you look around some of the heat warbling effects near fire, for instance, you can see some pixel breakup, which suggests that potentially there's reconstruction there, but it's actually, that shows how effective it could be because, effectively what you see, it looks visibly native 4K. It's very, very sharp.
The RE engine in like Resident Evil 2 or even in DMC5, when it did use this reconstruction, it was generally pretty hard to tell, the difference between the native thing and the reconstructed one. The only way we could really do it is not possible with this demo, where we would look at a native 4K version of that scene on PC, for example. So,
or usually if you have a cutscene, for instance, when the camera cuts, there's that moment after the camera cuts where you can check. That's not possible here as well because it's a single shot. So we'll have to wait for the final game to know more on that. But it is excellent image quality. And I think, Alex you also played this on your OLED, as I did with HDR initially, and I think the HDR implementation here is truly exceptional.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is one of the first games I've played where I can finally get the sense that I'm playing on current gen hardware. So I think there's a lot of continuity with the art style and the visual design of Resident Evil 7, but it's clearly much sharper than the previous game. And I think thanks to the effective HDR implementation, there's a lot of really good contrast between objects and the background, and it's really charming. I think there are a lot of rooms, especially one of the final areas of the demo that reminded me of the Resident Evil remake in terms of the things like the color palette, the design, and I thought it looked really nice.
See, that's the thing that I really like about this demo is when you get into this area, it genuinely starts to look like those pre-rendered backgrounds.
Yeah, it does.
So I kind of feel like we finally arrived at the point where it's like, okay, we're away from the pre-renders. We can achieve the same result in real time at 60 frames per second. Mostly, as we'll see. And it looks great.
I did end up playing this in SDR, actually, because I was just doing some capture to kind of look at it. And I did actually think, playing through the SDR image, I was less impressed probably than you guys were, because I think I was seeing a similar thing that I saw in Resident Evil 2 Remake, where it looked like the black levels were a little bit gray.
Yep.
So I think it's probably using a very similar level of color grading. So if you are seeing that on your television, I imagine you're just playing in SDR, and HDR will fix a lot of that.
The same way. I switched over to SDR for capture as well, and immediately the black levels are raised and the whole contrast seems significantly reduced. The difference between HDR and not HDR in this game is huge. So if you have an HDR set, you've got to see this. But yeah, Alex A is right. It does resemble Resident Evil 7 in many ways, but it does feel like the general level of detail is higher. The materials are improved. The general complexity of the objects in the environment seems boosted. I guess the only complaint I can really level at it visually is when you press your face up against any surface textures, like doors and such, the low-res nature kind of becomes evident, but I didn't find that overly distracting since it's not something... You don't usually just press your face up against these surfaces in a way that it reveals that. So it's not a huge deal. I think it's great looking. But the other major feature, though, and this one is very subtle in its implementation, but it's nice, is there is evidence of ray tracing in this demo.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at the kind of two effects I think that are present here is the ray trace reflections like we saw in DMC5. And these... you would think a more modern interior would show these off more readily, but a lot of the material choices here are pretty dull, and it looks like they kind of cut off the reflections at a certain level of material roughness here. So not a lot of materials do always show off these ray trace reflections, but when they're there, like on the floor, for example, in that one room that we were talking about earlier that reminds us so much of the, RE1 remake, you can see it there, like some of like the chairs on the floor being reflected, or like in this kind of like pots and stuff you can look around, or in the glass bottles, you'll see reflections in there. And I think the telltale sign that we're looking at ray trace reflections is, one, they show when they're not on screen, so it's not SSR, and two, because the kind of low resolution nature of the ones that they're doing here for this resolution target and frame rate target. I don't know what kind of resolution is internally. It could be something like 1/8 resolution, but they're pretty grainy. But it's not generally, it's only distracting if you're really looking for it. And the whole overall image though looks fine. The other effect that I think I saw here, but it's less obvious due to the lighting in the demo being primarily baked in a lot of areas, is in DMC5, they had a kind of local diffuse bounce light that they talked about, and you could see it in the game. Here, it looks like, I think I saw it in one scene where there's this bust on the right-hand panel of the right-hand side of the wall here that John and I were talking about offline earlier, and when you walk backwards and forwards into that room, you can see the BVH structure culling actually as the light and the reflections in the room turn on and off. So I think they're doing a lot here to make the game run at what looks to be, 4K and 60 FPS by, compromising some quality there and, culling a bit here and there. But in the end, it's an effective image. It works pretty well.
Yeah, I think it's actually a smart move here. And you're right, the roughness cutoff is adjusted so only the shiniest of surfaces show reflections. But it's subtle enough where you appreciate that extra detail, especially since you can now see like the underside of objects, which isn't possible with SSR. But, I like this balance. They're targeting a high frame rate with a high resolution still, while using limited ray tracing features as well at the same time, where, super high res ray trace reflections everywhere would be too much, I think, for the consoles right now to do at this resolution and frame rate. So it sort of sets a precedent for where we're going from here, and I like that. I guess the only real caveat here to all the visuals that we've seen is the frame rate. Now, it's mostly 60 frames per second, but when you get out into this main hall and look out over the area, there are some minor dips. They're the kind of dips where I'm like, I hope Sony hurries up with the firmware enabling VRR support on the PS5, because that would completely fix this easily. But also, the game's not finished, and this is just a demo. So again, this is the kind of stuff that could totally just improve by the time we get to launch. So I'm not overly worried about it. It's just an interesting thing to note.
One thing that I think is important to point out here is both RE2 Remake and RE7 itself. This game has, I would say, it doesn't have a lot of huge open areas with a lot of enemy AI and things like that. It has a rather stable performance, so I would imagine even if the retail game when it came out performed similarly to this right here, I think this is the worst it could probably be.
I guess maybe, but there does seem to be a lot more to this game beyond just these confined spaces.
Well, that's the thing. We have seen very little of the actual game through this demo, and the outdoor areas are definitely going to be a lot larger than anything we've it's a village, and the whole idea behind this is that you can seamlessly go from one area to the other. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the game handles the outdoor areas when we get to them. I know for sure that the level of action, and I think the number of enemies will definitely be greater than what we saw in Resident Evil 7 as well. So, I mean, it could be nothing. It could be something to worry about. But the Tokyo Game Show demo that they played at Capcom stream last year, we didn't get to see what was going on, but we definitely heard that there was a lot of gun shooting and a lot of enemies and a lot of running and evading. So the action is definitely going to get very hectic. And I mean, if you saw the outdoor areas toward the end of the demo, you can see that it's snowing, so there are a lot of particle effects that you wouldn't necessarily see in the indoor areas. So I would actually reserve judgment for the performance based on, at least as far as this demo is concerned. I think Capcom was very careful to call this a visual showcase demo. It's largely devoid of gameplay, of any substance. And I think given what we're supposed to do in this demo, like look for things in the most obscure crevices, I think they wanted us to look at all these visual assets to observe objects and rotate them when they're on the screen and so on and so forth. And I think the demo does that very well, and we can appreciate the art direction and the technology that's powering it. But I am actually, as a Resident Evil fan, very interested to see how the actual performance is when we're in the most hectic areas. If we look at parts of RE3, Alex B, did you play RE3 as well? Or did you?
I played through it on PC. Yeah.
PC. Yeah. I mean, I'm a little concerned because if we both remember the hospital siege sequence with all the zombies, and the game had to do a few things to deal with that, like with the exploding zombies and the frame drops on the consoles. So it'll be interesting to see how much Capcom has been able to build on that and make that less of a problem.
Yeah, I mean that is ultimately the big question here, because it does, based on, so you didn't see the full presentation, Alex.
No, I did not.
And that's that shows off so much more of the game than we've seen before, and all these outdoor areas and everything. It's significantly different, and they are kind of hanging with the seamlessness of RE7. Which means they couldn't selectively enable ray tracing so easily. I mean, the BVH structure impact will always kind of be there in the background,
right?
Because they're going to be running this whether there's reflective objects or not, I suppose.
Mm.
I guess I'm really curious about this. I mean, it seems to me like the solution would be a nice aggressive. The solution would be a nice dynamic resolution scaling setup.
Yeah, that would be pretty great, but I don't think they tend to do that in RE Engine games to this point, right? It's always been really static resolutions, as far as I recall, looking back through my history of RE games. Then again, they've also just to be a little speculation here, is they've always targeted unstable frame rates for non-DMC games. I would say, like all the RE games, for the most part, they weren't always a perfect 60 on the consoles, because it didn't seem like they were targeting a perfect 60. So
it was close enough, though, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, I finished RE2 on both those machines, and it's generally quite stable. Outside of, I mean, again, similar to this RE Village demo, the main hall and the police station is one area where you did get dips on the consoles, but most other areas in the game were completely stable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it bears worth mentioning that Village is it obviously Capcom's been marketing it for PS5 and Xbox Series X, and those are the consoles that they announced it for first. But I think it's a pretty open secret at this point that this game started out on last gen consoles and was built with those systems in mind. So it'll be interesting to see just what that disparity is going to end up being.
Yeah, it really does call to mind the DMC5 situation, where they basically added ray tracing features and things like that to the mix. So it kind of makes sense to see that implemented here. And I suspect that we'll be looking at visual fidelity similar to RE2 and RE3 on the last gen machines, perhaps. It's, hard to say for sure, but that would probably be my best guess.
Probably. It's hard to compare because they look so different, I think. But definitely.
Exactly. I know that's the thing. But at the same time, there's a similar, if you look at the areas in both the demo and in the trailer, there's a similar level of complexity, scene complexity overall, I'd say, to like RE3 or RE2, perhaps. Maybe a slight boost over that, but it's comparable. So you can see the last gen roots.
I think some of the last gen roots are visible when you sometimes look at the geometric detail of certain objects, like, I don't know, just like a scattered apple on a platter or something like that. They are targeting 60 FPS at a high resolution here with ray tracing, so something does have to give in the end. And I think, the cross-gen roots just show more in model detail and maybe texture detail at times, yeah.
But really, I mean, this just showcases the importance of art direction and just, because it really looks phenomenal and the technology is great, but it's really it's the remarkable work on the art that I think stands out the most. Just the lighting and the scenarios that they've crafted here. It's extremely beautiful to behold. And yeah, based on the other footage, it does seem like the full game is going to take you to quite a few different areas. In the village itself, like some of the combat sequences kind of remind me of RE4 a little bit, only in first person. It has that sense to it, so I'm very curious to see how this plays out. And we don't have to wait too long. I guess May 7th, I think, is when it's supposed to hit. But yeah, so obviously this has just been kind of a fun little back and forth discussion here. There isn't that much to cover yet, but I think the summary here is that the demo looks awesome. It's very promising for what the final game will look like. The fact that we have such a high resolution and frame rate with ray tracing in the mix at this visual fidelity is excellent. So it does feel like it's going to be a nice showcase for next-gen consoles. Obviously, the last-gen machines will not have ray tracing features. I'll be curious to see if they just swap in the SSR, because I feel like RE Engine's SSR implementation is always a little bit artifacty.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we'll see. I think when they showed off a video of it a while back, they did show it with SSR in that one, RE1 looking scene. So that was probably the last gen version. Or
to be fair though, SSR in general is it behaves better when you're in a first person environment.
For sure.
Because you don't have that third person model sort of occluding the view from the SSR, so it's it doesn't break up all the time. So yeah, it could work okay. We'll find out obviously soon enough.
We'll see. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's probably going to do it for this video, gentlemen. So thank you to both of you for joining me.
Of course, Sean.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And if you guys enjoyed this sort of quick preview discussion of Resident Evil Village, be sure to let us know and like and subscribe, ring the notification bell, find us on Twitter, all that good stuff. And until next time, Dino Crisis sucks.
Finally, a headset that can be as expressive as you. G733 is wireless and designed for comfort, and it's outfitted with all the surround sound, voice filters and advanced lighting you need to look, sound and play with more style than ever. Lightspeed Wireless technology lets you game wirelessly without compromises in latency, connectivity or battery. Play in complete freedom with over 20 hours of battery life and a range of up to 15 meters.